He thought the ocean would swallow his sins. He thought the storm would wash the evidence clean. When Sheriff Marcus Doyle kicked the limp body off the jagged rocks and into the black Atlantic, he believed the tide would handle the rest. No witnesses, no loose ends, just another accident on a treacherous New England coast. He never saw the dark shape watching from the end of the abandoned pier. A man in a worn marine jacket, with a lean, scarred Belgian Malinois sitting motionless at his heel. He never realized that on that night, with the wind howling off the Maine shoreline and the gulls screaming overhead, he'd just made an enemy who didn't scare easily. A man who'd lost too many good people to cowards in uniform. The storm would hide a lot of things, but not from Shadow. The wind came in sideways off the Atlantic, hurling cold needles of rain that turned the harbor lights into blurry smears. Camden Point, Maine, was the kind of coastal town that appeared on postcards in July and on missing persons reports in November. The fishing boats bobbed in the dark water like tired animals tethered to their stalls, rigging creaking, hulls groaning as the storm rolled in. It was just after midnight. Most sane people had gone home hours ago, retreating to wood stove warmth and the comfort of walls that didn't move. On the far side of the harbor, beyond the last working lobster shack, the skeleton of an old cannery jutted out over the water, rusted corrugated metal and broken windows, a relic from a time when the town processed more fish than gossip. Ethan Cole ran that shoreline like it was his personal treadmill. 35, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet, watchful eyes that didn't miss much, Ethan was one of those men people instinctively stepped aside for without knowing why. He'd spent 12 years in the Marines, most of it with a raider unit that existed on paper as a logistics group, and in reality as the tip of a very sharp spear. He'd left his commission behind in a dusty Afghan valley, along with 3 men whose names never left his lips. Now, he ran docks. It should have been a demotion. Instead, it felt like breathing again. Shadow loped ahead of him, barely a blur against the dark gravel of the service road. The dog moved like poured smoke, compact, lethal, every muscle tuned to some internal frequency Ethan sometimes envied. His coat was a dark sable, his ears standing tall, his eyes a deep amber that gleamed when they caught the faint orange glow of the sodium lamps. To the tourists in summer, Shadow was a photo opportunity. To Ethan, he was the only reason he still slept. "Heel," Ethan called, his breath frosting in the air. Shadow checked his pace instantly, falling in beside Ethan's left leg with military precision. The dog's vest, faded black nylon from another life, bore a single patch over his shoulder blade. K9 Shadow, USMC, Reti. "Storms picking up," Ethan muttered, glancing out at the pounding surf. "We do 1 more mile, then hot shower. Deal?" Shadow's ears flicked as if considering the terms. They moved past the last clutter of bait barrels and stacked lobster traps, approaching the abandoned cannery. The wind keened through the broken windows, making the old building sound like it was mourning. Waves slammed into the rock wall below, with a hollow boom that vibrated up through Ethan's boots. Shadow's head snapped to the left. He stopped so abruptly the leash went taut. Ethan felt the line jerk and instinctively tightened his grip. "Easy," he said softly. "What do you got?" Shadow's body went rigid, tail level, nose lifted into the swirling rain. He drew in a series of short, sharp breaths, then cut across Ethan's path toward the chain-link fence that separated the service road from the narrow, rocky drop-off to the sea. There was an opening in the fence, an old cut that had been half-heartedly wired back together. Shadow shoved through the gap without waiting for permission. "Shadow, hold!" The dog didn't. He never broke obedience on a whim. Ethan's heart rate ticked up. He slipped through the fence after him, boots skidding on wet rock. The ground sloped sharply toward the water, seaweed glistening like slick green ropes between boulders dark with spray. The roar of the surf overwhelmed everything, the wind stealing the sound of his own breathing. Shadow was halfway down the incline, front paws braced on a ledge. He looked back at Ethan and whined, a low, urgent sound Ethan had only heard a handful of times, and never for anything trivial. "Okay," Ethan muttered. "Okay, buddy, I'm coming." He picked his way down, using his hands when the footing got treacherous. Salt spray slapped his face. The smell hit him before he reached Shadow, a coppery tang that didn't belong to seawater. Blood. Shadow had his nose pressed against a narrow cleft in the rocks, where the sea surged in and out like a breathing thing. A flash of color appeared between waves, dark fabric, pale skin. For a heartbeat, Ethan thought it was just a body. Then the pale shape shuddered. Son of a... He slid the last few feet, catching himself on a protruding rock. The cleft formed a shallow, wave-washed cave, barely big enough for a person to be wedged into. Whoever had dumped the body had chosen well. One more high tide, and there'd be nothing left but questions. A wave surged in, slapping cold water up to Ethan's knees. He squinted into the darkness, flicked on the small tactical light he still carried out of habit, and aimed the beam inside. She lay on her side, half submerged, arms twisted above her head. One wrist was cuffed to a metal ring driven into the rock, the kind sailors used to tie off small boats. Her hair was plastered to her face, dark with blood and seawater, lips blue, skin the color of milk left in a freezer. A trooper's uniform clung to her like another layer of wet skin, dark green, shoulder patch of the Maine State Police, shredded at the upper arm where something had torn through the fabric and flesh beneath. A bullet wound? Maybe. Another dark patch spread across her side where the coat had been split open and hastily strapped tight with duct tape. Not random, not an accident. Someone had worked very hard to make sure she never came back. Her chest rose in a shallow, jerky motion. "Shadow, back!" Ethan snapped, killing the light. He didn't know who might still be nearby. The dog obeyed instantly, backing up the rocks a few steps, eyes never leaving the opening. Ethan dropped into a crouch, cold water soaking through his jeans. A wave crashed, surging up to his waist this time, slamming her limp body hard against the rock. She made a small sound, more exhale than voice. But it was enough. "You're not dying here," Ethan said, voice low and steady because panic didn't help anyone. "Not like this." He shoved the light between his teeth, wedged himself into the cleft, and got a hand on her shoulder. Her skin was like ice. He found the cuff, followed the cold metal to where it anchored into the rock, and swore under his breath. No key. Of course not. He pulled a folding knife from his pocket, flipped it open, and jammed the blade between ring and rock. The steel screeched as he levered his weight against it. For a second, nothing happened. Then the old ring tore free with a metallic shriek. Another wave hammered into them, knocking his shoulder into stone. Pain exploded down his arm. He grunted but didn't let go, curling his body around hers as the water crashed over them both. When it receded, he shifted, getting her limp form across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. She was lighter than he expected. Too light. "Shadow, up!" he gasped, pushing to his feet on slick rock. The ascent was brutal. Every step threatened to send them both sliding back into the churning black below. Shadow scrambled back and forth above them, whining, placing himself where Ethan could grab fur or harness if he needed anchoring. Halfway up, Ethan's boot slipped. The world lurched. For an instant, gravity won. Shadow lunged, teeth snapping closed on the strap of Ethan's sling bag, bracing his weight against a rock. The tug was just enough. Ethan's foot found purchase again. "Good boy," he panted, heart hammering. "Good boy." They stumbled through the fence and onto the gravel road. The cannery loomed to their left, a hulking silhouette against the stormy sky. The harbor lights were dimmed halos through the rain. No headlights, no approaching sirens. Whoever had done this thought the ocean would do the rest of the work. Ethan shifted her weight and started toward the far end of the harbor, toward the small, clapboard building tucked beneath the bluff, his boathouse. There was a clinic in town, sure, a sheriff's substation too, and a tiny hospital, 19. Miles inland on the highway. He didn't head for any of them. He'd seen the way the state troopers down at the diner had gone quiet when Sheriff Doyle walked in, heads ducking, eyes sliding away. He'd heard the muttered jokes about Doyle's Law, and who needs the feds when you own the judge? Most people laughed when they said it. Ethan hadn't. Whoever cuffed a cop to a rock in a storm hadn't been worried about random strangers. They'd been worried about the wrong people finding her alive. Tonight, Ethan decided, he was going to be the wrong people. The boathouse had been his grandfather's once, a 2-story rectangle of weathered gray boards clinging to the base of the bluff, overlooking a private little cove where the water ran deep and cold. A simple wooden dock jutted out, and below that, In her cradle floated the Marigold, a 28-foot trawler that would never see another commercial season but made a decent live aboard. He shouldered the door open with his back, shadow darting in ahead, nails clicking on the rough plank floor. Ethan laid the woman down on the old workbench cleared in the middle of the room, under the single fluorescent tube that buzzed like an annoyed insect. She didn't stir. Up close, under harsh light, she looked even worse. Late 20s, maybe. Freckles faintly visible beneath the pallor. Dark hair cropped short in a practical cut that said she didn't have time for vanity. The bullet graze on her upper arm had clotted badly, soaked through the sleeve. The wound at her side, weeping through the tape, looked worse. A second gunshot, low and right. Someone had tried to pack it with torn gauze and tape before giving up and dumping her in the ocean. They'd wanted her to bleed out slow. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, faint, thready. But there. Shadow, guard. The dog took up position by the door, lying sphinx-like, eyes on the entrance, ears pricked forward. Ethan grabbed the old first aid kit from under the bench and realized it was nowhere near enough. He needed more than gauze and aspirin. He needed Harlan. Ethan dug his phone from his pocket, thumb already hitting the contact. It rang twice. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" A gravelly voice answered. "There better be a body, Cole." "There is," Ethan said, "and she's still breathing." A pause, then, more alert. "Who?" "State trooper, young, 2 gunshot wounds and hypothermia. Someone left her for the tide." A muttered curse on the other end. "You at your place?" "Boathouse. I'll be there in 15. Heat the room, boil water, and Cole?" "Yeah?" "Don't call 911. If they left a trooper to drown, someone's rotten up the chain." The line went dead. Ethan tossed the phone aside, cranked the old propane heater to life, and set a kettle on the camp stove in the corner. He peeled off the soaked layers from the woman's torso, with as much care as he could manage, averting his eyes where dignity demanded, cutting fabric instead of tugging. There was a faded name tag on her uniform shirt. Ward. He filed it away. "Come on, Ward," he muttered, working. "You didn't crawl your way through that much crap on the rocks to die on my bench. Not how this goes." Her eyelids fluttered at the sound of her own name. "Mom," she whispered, voice a ragged thread. Not the lake, please. I didn't." "Shh," Ethan said, surprised at the gentleness in his own tone. "You're not there. You're in a boathouse, and some cranky old medic's about to yell at us both. You just focus on breathing." Her hand twitched weakly, searching for something. Shadow moved without being called, laying his head on the edge of the bench, nudging his warm muzzle under her fingers. They curled into his fur like it was a lifeline. Her breathing slowed, but it didn't stop. Not yet. Dr. Samuel Harlan was not technically a doctor anymore. He'd been an Army trauma surgeon once, the kind that flew into combat zones in helicopters and patched together young men who arrived in pieces. Then he'd watched one too many come in with injuries their briefing had said weren't possible. He'd seen the numbers not match the reports. He'd mentioned it in the wrong room, and suddenly his re-up paperwork vanished, and a review board suggested maybe he'd like to retire. Now he ran a tiny clinic above a hardware store in town, and occasionally showed up at Ethan's boathouse at ungodly hours, carrying an olive green bag straight out of another war. He stepped into the boathouse with rain dripping from his hat brim, eyes sweeping the room once and locking onto the woman on the bench. "Damn," he said softly. "You weren't kidding." Harlan was in his late 60s, hair a wild thatch of white, hands steady as stone. He shrugged off his coat, barked, "Hot water," and glanced down at Shadow. The dog gave him a quiet chuff, then returned his gaze to the door. "Evening to you, too," Harlan muttered. "Let's see what they did to you, Trooper Ward." "Riley?" Ethan said, surprised at himself. Harlan raised an eyebrow. "Her name," Ethan clarified. "Riley Ward, tag on her shirt." "Riley, then," Harlan said, leaning in. "Hang around long enough, and we'll get to complain about the weather together." He worked in a blur of efficient motion, cutting away soaked bandages, cleaning the wounds with boiled water and antiseptic that made Ethan's own scars itch in sympathy. The graze on her arm was ugly but straightforward. The wound at her side was worse, through and through, low enough to miss the liver but close enough to be terrifying. The duct tape had trapped infection against the skin. Whoever stuffed this and dumped her figured the cold water would keep the swelling down, Harlan grunted. Smart enough to pack, dumb enough to leave her in the ocean, or just cruel enough not to care. She say anything? He added without looking up. A lake, Ethan said. Said something about a lake, and her mom. Harlan glanced at him once, sharp and knowing. People talk to ghosts on the edge. Doesn't mean the living can't listen. He irrigated the wound, stitched with the speed of deep habit, then started an IV with the grace of someone who could do it on a shaking black hawk. The whole time, Riley's fingers stayed tangled in Shadow's fur. The dog never moved. When Harlan finally stepped back, his face was grim, but not hopeless. She'll live, he said, if the infection doesn't get cute, and if whoever tried to drown her doesn't realize she's missing. I'm not calling the sheriff, Ethan said. Didn't figure you were. Harlan wiped his hands on a towel. How much do you trust Doyle? I don't, Ethan said simply. Good, means your instincts aren't shot yet. Harlan turned to pack up, then paused. You need to decide soon, Cole. If she wakes up and decides you're the enemy, she could blow everything trying to do the right thing by protocol. Or she might be the only one who can tell you who pulled the trigger. Either way, you just stepped in something bigger than wet rocks. Ethan's jaw clenched. I found a cop cuffed to the coast. I was already in it. Harlan studied him for a long moment. You still got that number? The one from your old CO? Ethan's eyes flicked to the small lockbox under the workbench. He hadn't opened it in 3 years. Yes, he said. Harlan nodded once. If she starts talking about local uniforms being the problem, you use it. The medic patted Shadow's head on his way to the door. You did good, soldier. Next time find me someone who just sprained an ankle, yeah? Shadow's tail thumped once. The door closed behind Harlan with a soft click, leaving Ethan with the soft beep of the IV pump, the hum of the heater, and the steady sound of the storm. Riley Ward lay on his bench, a stranger whose near murder was about to blow his life open. Shadow shifted closer, resting his head on Ethan's knee, eyes on the woman's pale face. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. I know, buddy. We don't walk away from this one. Riley woke to the smell of salt and diesel and wet dog. For a moment, her brain insisted she was 12 again, sitting on the faded dock of Kettle Lake while her mother scrubbed mildew off the family canoe and yelled at her to put sunscreen on her nose. Then the ache in her side roared to life, sharp and electric, and the memory of falling, cold, endless black water closing over her head, snapped her all the way back. She jerked upright with a strangled cry, pain detonated behind her eyes, her vision blew out white, then slowly resolved into a low wooden ceiling, crisscrossed, with beams, a single fluorescent light, and a man in a faded marine hoodie sitting on a stool near the end of the bench, hands open and visible. The dog was closer, much closer. He sat with his muzzle on the edge of the bench, eyes large, amber, unblinking. Warmth radiated from his presence. Easy, the man said, voice calm, low. You move like that again, you'll undo that old bastard's sewing job, and he'll drive back down here just to yell at both of us. Riley's throat was raw, but she managed a sound that might have been a laugh in another lifetime. Where? She coughed, winced. Where am I? Boathouse, he said. Camden Point. You're safe for the moment. Who are you? Ethan Cole. He nodded at the dog. That's Shadow. You met when you were trying very hard to freeze to death. Memory knifed through her, the feel of water swallowing her, the weight of the hand on her shoulder shoving her backwards into the dark slit in the rocks, the glint of a badge in the lightning flash, and the cold, bored voice. Tide will take her. Let's go. Riley's fingers closed convulsively in Shadow's fur. The dog made a low rumble, not a growl, more like a grounding vibration. My unit, she rasped. My radio. Where? Gone, Ethan said. No gear, just your cuffs and what someone tried to do to you with them. She swallowed hard. Sheriff Doyle, his deputy at least, and my partner. The words tasted like betrayal. She wanted to spit them out. You sure? Ethan asked. Riley's laugh was bitter and humorless. I watched Doyle sign the warrant that didn't exist. Then I watched him aim the gun he claimed he never drew. Her fingers twitched, remembering the flash of muzzle, the burning hot impact along her side, the sudden absence of ground beneath her heels. She'd trusted the wrong men with her life. "Why'd they try to kill you?" Ethan asked bluntly. She closed her eyes. She could lie. Say she didn't remember. Refused to drag some stranger into the mess that had grown like mold under the floorboards of her town for the last 2 years. But then she remembered the feel of Shadow's fur in the black water, the warm weight of his head under her palm when she'd thought it was the last thing she'd ever feel. She owed them more than a lie. "I was working a missing persons case," she said slowly. "Officially, it was a hit and run. Unofficially, it was the 5th young woman from the halfway house to slip and disappear in under a year." Ethan's eyes sharpened. "The rehab on the old Lighthouse Road." She nodded, surprised. "You know it? I move boats. I see who comes and goes," he said. "I know when same black SUV takes the same turn every Thursday at 2 a.m. and never uses its headlights." Her heart stuttered. "You've seen them." "Didn't know who them was," he said. "Keep talking." Riley felt her, pulse in her throat. "I followed the SUV last week," she said, shame heating her cheeks despite the cold. "Alone, against procedure. They teach you in the academy not to do that. But you know what else they teach? If your sergeant's in bed with the suspect, you get creative." Ethan's mouth twitched. "Somehow, I missed that lecture in the Marines. I've been tracking overdoses," she went on. "Not the found behind a bar kind. The morgue calls that get quietly reclassified from overdose to cardiac arrest when there's a certain signature on the paperwork. Most of them come from Doyle's jurisdiction. Most of them were picked up last by the same patrol unit." She swallowed. "My partner's unit." The room seemed to shrink. The hum of the fluorescent bulb grew louder. "I found a cabin at the edge of North Ridge," Riley whispered. "Half burnt down from a fire nobody remembered. In the basement, there were restraints, chains in the floor, biohazard bags, paperwork, a ledger." Her hands had shaken as she'd flipped through it, but the numbers and the names had burned themselves into her mind. "Doyle's overdoses weren't overdoses," she said. "They were inventory, people in recovery, people with no families left who'd fight for them. They were selling bodies, Cole, organs. The ones who died quick were the lucky ones." Ethan's jaw clenched, tendons standing out like cords. Shadow's ears flattened. "I took pictures," Riley said. "The ledger, the restraints. I was emailing them to the state AG when Doyle and my partner walked in." Her eyes went distant for a second, seeing the cold concrete basement, the way her partner Luke had said her name, soft, almost apologetic, before he'd holstered his gun and stepped aside to let Doyle in. "He asked me if I really thought the system would care," she whispered. "Said the donors got paid, the recipients got a second chance, and he got to retire someplace warm. Asked me why I wanted to ruin such a neat circle." "What did you say?" Ethan asked. "I told him God would care," she said. "He laughed, said God didn't sign his paycheck." The rest had been fast, a flash of metal, the crack of the shot at her arm, another at her side as she'd dive for cover, a boot, the sudden open sky as she'd been dragged up the ridge path to the cliffs, the taste of blood and bile, the feel of handcuffs digging into skin as they'd fixed her to the ring. Luke had said, "We could still make this an accident, Sheriff." Doyle had said, "We are." Then the world had tipped backward, and the ocean had swallowed her. She finished the story staring at a knot in the wooden ceiling, breathing shallow, every word pulling stitches. When she finally looked back at Ethan, his eyes were different, harder, colder. "You send that email?" he asked. "I hit send," she said. "But the power went out at the same time. Storm. I don't know if it went through." "Phone?" "Doyle crushed it under his boot," she said. "But I backed everything up on a flash drive. It's—" Her stomach plummeted. It wasn't in her pocket. It wasn't on the bench. "The cabin," she said hoarsely. "It was in my inner vest. They would have taken— I don't—" Shadow barked once, sharp, insistent. Ethan's head snapped toward the door. A car engine, faint over the wind, tires crunching on gravel. Ethan's hand went to the small of his back. Riley saw the outline of a pistol as he stood, motioning her to lie back. "Play dead," he said quietly. "Not hard," she muttered through clenched teeth. He moved to the side of the door, out of line. Shadow slipped into a down position beside the bench, head up, eyes locked on the entrance. The dog's body vibrated with contained energy. The engine cut off. Boot steps on the dock, 2 sets. Light, confident, no knock. The doorknob rattled once and then turned. Someone had used a key. That fact settled in Ethan's gut like ice. Only 2 people besides him had keys to the boathouse, Harlan and the harbor master. The door swung inward. "Cole," a voice called. "You decent? Heard you had a late run out here. Thought I'd make sure my favorite insomniac hadn't fallen in." Harbor master Frank Malloy filled the doorway. A big man gone soft, gray hair flattened by the rain, reflective jacket half unzipped. Behind him stood another figure in civilian clothes, hood up, hands in pockets, face shadowed. Ethan relaxed. A fraction. "Storm's keeping everyone awake," Ethan said. "What's up, Frank?" Frank stomped his boots on the threshold, peering past Ethan. His gaze snagged on the bench, the pale form under blankets, the IV line. His expression changed. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a flattening of his mouth. "You had a rough night, looks like," Frank said slowly. "No call to the Coast Guard, though. That an oversight, or—" "She came off the rocks," Ethan said evenly. "Harlan patched her. She's barely hanging on. Didn't think you wanted paperwork until she wasn't trying to die." The man in the hood shifted, and Riley caught a glimpse of his face. Her blood turned to ice. Luke, her partner. He'd shaved his beard, traded the uniform for jeans and a fleece, but she'd have known the angle of that jaw in a crowd of 1,000. His eyes slid over the room, pausing only a fraction of a second too long on her seemingly unconscious form. "Storm's nasty," Luke said casually. "A lot of accidents on nights like this. Sheriff's out, making sure no tourists drove off the Ridge Road. He'll be real interested in your Jane Doe, Cole." Ethan's thumb brushed the safety of his pistol. "Sheriff's welcome to come see her," he said. "Once she's strong enough to answer questions from the state investigators, I call first thing in the morning." Silence hummed for a beat. Frank's smile didn't meet his eyes. "No need to go over anyone's head. Sheriff Doyle's handled every accident on this coast for 20 years. And left a trooper to drown tonight," Ethan said softly. Luke's eyes sharpened. "You don't know what you're talking about, Marine." "True," Ethan said. "I just know what I pulled off the rocks with cuff marks and bullet holes. You'll forgive me if I take a minute to think about it." Shadow's ears were flat now, lips slightly peeled from his teeth, but he didn't growl. He'd been trained not to announce his warning twice. Frank shifted his weight. His hand dipped into his jacket. Too slow, too deliberate to be cold. "Last chance, Cole," he said. Riley found her voice. "Luke!" she croaked. His head snapped toward her. "Don't," she whispered. "He's not on their payroll yet." It was a gamble. She saw the flicker in Luke's eyes, the flash of guilt, of something like shame. Then it shuddered. "You were supposed to be dead," he said. "Yeah," she whispered. "Doyle's not as good a shot as he thinks." Luke's jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, it looked like he might lower his hand. Frank sighed. "Marine," he said, almost regretful, "this would have been a lot easier if you'd just called 911. He yanked his hand up, the metal flash of a compact pistol catching the fluorescent light. Shadow moved first. The dog launched off the floor like a bullet, hitting Frank's center mass before he could align the gun. The shot went wide, pinging off the metal shelving. Frank went down hard. Shadow's teeth clamped on his forearm, driving the weapon away. Ethan was already moving. He stepped into Luke's draw, knocking the man's arm up with his forearm, the shot slamming into the ceiling. He drove his shoulder into Luke's chest, carried him backward into the wall with enough force to rattle tools on their hooks. The world shrank to fists and elbows, and the desperate grunting sounds of men who knew what mistakes cost. Riley tried to sit up, failed, and settled for grabbing the nearest object, a heavy wrench, and flinging it with all the strength she had at Luke's head. It hit his temple with a sickening thud. He staggered, grip loosening on the pistol, just enough for Ethan to twist it free. A flat crack echoed in the small space as Ethan fired once into the floor inches from Luke's hip. "Don't," Ethan said, voice deadly calm. "I've put down better men than you. Don't make me add your name to a list I already hate." Luke froze. On the other side of the room, Frank howled as Shadow shook his arm like a terrier with a rat. The pistol skittered across the floor and under a shelf. "Shadow, out!" Ethan barked. The dog dropped Frank's arm instantly, backing up, blood on his muzzle. He planted himself between Riley and the harbor master, hackles raised. Frank cradled his shredded forearm, eyes wild. "You're all dead," he spat. "Doyle owns this town. You think the state gives a damn? You think anyone's going to listen to a washed-up Marine and a junkie trooper?" Ethan's gaze flicked to Riley. Her jaw tightened. She could have snarled, could have defended herself. Instead, she looked at Luke. "You still going to his poker nights, partner?" she asked softly. "Still letting him tell you which calls to ignore?" Luke couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Doyle gave me a job when nobody else. He gave you scraps off a table he built out of other people's bodies," she said. "You really think men like him don't eat their own when they get hungry enough?" Silence hummed between them. Frank shifted, inching toward the door. Shadow growled this time, low, lethal. Ethan kept his gun leveled. "You've got two options, Frank," he said. "You walk out of here with a tourniquet and a chance to pick which prosecutor you talk to first, or you try again, and we find out if the tide's as hungry as Doyle thinks." Frank licked his lips, eyes darting between the dog and the gun. "You won't shoot," he said. "You're one of the good guys." Ethan's eyes were very, very cold. "You're mistaking me for someone who still cares what that word means." Luke swallowed. "Frank," he said quietly, "we should go." Frank stared at him. "You switching sides now, boy?" "I'm remembering I swore an oath," Luke said. His voice shook, but he didn't look away. Ethan filed that away for later. "Go!" he said. Frank stumbled to his feet, clutching his arm. Luke picked up his dropped pistol by the barrel and slid it across the floor to Ethan, hands visible. "I'll buy you an hour," Luke said, eyes flicking once to Riley. "Maybe two. After that, I can't stop what's coming." "You could tell the State Trooper HQ what your sheriff's doing," Riley whispered, his face twisted. "You think they don't already suspect? They just don't want to pull the thread." Then he turned and followed Frank out into the storm. The door slammed shut behind them. For a moment, the only sound was the pounding of Ethan's heart and the ragged wheeze of Riley's breathing. Shadow sat in the middle of the floor, chest heaving, blood dotting the fur around his mouth, eyes bright and unrepentant. Ethan looked at Riley. "You still got fight left?" he asked. She gave a weak, humorless smile. "Enough to hate you if you leave me here?" "Good," he said. "Because if Doyle's coming, I need more than one stubborn idiot on my side." He holstered the pistol, crossed to the workbench, and dragged the lockbox out from underneath. The combination felt foreign under his fingers, like a language he hadn't spoken in years. Inside lay a black satellite phone wrapped in oiled cloth. He unwrapped it, extended the antenna, and hit the only number in its memory. It rang once. "Cole," a voice said. Calm, controlled, a voice that made Ethan's spine straighten automatically. "Colonel Harris," Ethan said. "You told me to call if I ever saw something that smelled like Kandahar and wore a badge." "You're 3 years late," Harris said. "What's happening?" Ethan looked at Riley, pale, furious, alive, at Shadow, bloody, unbowed. "At least 2 dead bodies," Ethan said quietly. "Organ trafficking, corrupt law enforcement, and a sheriff who thinks the coast will eat his sins. I've got a witness and a dog who both disagree." On the other end of the line, the silence lengthened. When Harris spoke again, his voice had an edge Ethan remembered from briefing rooms where the maps were always marked classified. "You have proof?" Harris asked. "Not yet," Ethan said. "Doyle's got whatever she gathered, ledger, photos. Some of it might still be at a cabin in North Ridge. You think he's working alone?" "Not a chance." Another pause. "You still capable of running a small team op, Cole, off the books?" Ethan's hand dropped reflexively to rest on Shadow's head. The dog leaned into the touch. "Depends who's on the team," Ethan said. "I can get Ruiz and Tessa within 12 hours, Harris said. "You remember them? Sniper, comms wizard. 2 ghosts from a life Ethan had tried to lock away in a box with that phone. "You calling this in to the Bureau?" Ethan asked. "Eventually," Harris said. "Problem with cancer in a small town is the first chemo dose usually kills the patient. You want the rot out without the town going with it, you'll need scalpel work first." Riley's eyes met Ethan's. "I don't want Camden burned to the ground to save me," she said. "I want it cleaned so nobody else disappears like those girls." Ethan nodded once. "Send Ruiz to the airfield in Rockford," he said into the phone. Old hangar on the south fence. Tell Tessa to bring toys. And you? Harris asked. I'll keep your witness breathing and your dog fed until they get here, Ethan said. Then we go hunting. A dior. 12 hours later, the storm had blown east, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and a town that had no idea it was about to become a battlefield. On the hill above the harbor, Sheriff Marcus Doyle stood in front of his bathroom mirror, tying his tie. He was pushing 50 but held himself like a man still 30, shoulders filling out his dress shirt, hair slicked back with care. His reflection smiled back at him, confident and smooth. On the counter beside the sink, a small local news station played on his phone. A perky morning anchor chirped about holiday toy drives and storm damage minimal. No mention of a missing state trooper. No Amber Alerts, no breaking news. He'd checked twice. See, he murmured, straightening his tie. Tide takes care of loose ends. He turned the TV volume down as his wife called from the kitchen. Marcus, you're going to be late for the council briefing. 5 minutes, he called back, slipping his badge onto his belt. He'd built this little kingdom one favor at a time. Fixed tickets, ignored DUIs, made sure the right people got called first when boats went missing. Everyone owed him something. Everyone depended on him. He'd earned his cut. He headed downstairs humming under his breath, thinking of palm trees and a real estate brochure on his desk from a gated community in Florida. He never noticed the unmarked black SUV parked 2 houses down, engine cold, windows dark. He didn't see the camera lens behind the upstairs curtain of the house across the street, tracking his every move. He didn't know that somewhere down at the harbor, in a shadowed boathouse that smelled of diesel and stubbornness, a man, a dog, and a trooper he thought he'd fed to the sea were planning how to rip the rot out from under his feet. By nightfall, Ethan's boathouse looked less like a place to store nets and more like a forward operating base. A folding table held Tessa Ung's laptop array, cables snaking out to a makeshift antenna on the roof. Ruiz's rifle case lay open on the workbench, foam cradling a long-barreled .308 like it was made of glass. Maps of Camden Point and its surrounding forests papered the walls, routes marked in red grease pencil. Riley sat propped up on a pile of old boat cushions, still pale but with a spark in her eyes again. Shadow lay beside her, chin on her knee, the embodiment of patient vigilance. You understand this doesn't end with an arrest and a press conference, Ruiz said quietly, studying her. Guys like Doyle, they have exit plans, bolt holes, kill switches. I understand, Riley said. You want to walk away? This is your last chance. Ruiz's dark eyes crinkled. He looked at Ethan. You always did pick the fun vacations, Hermano. Tessa stabbed a finger at her screen. I've got something, she said. Pulled utility records like you asked. There's an anomaly on the ridge, half a mile from where you said the cabin was. Property listed to a shell corp. Electric usage spikes 3 times a week at weird hours. Cabin, Riley breathed. They're still using it. More than that, Tessa said. I spoofed a ping off Doyle's personal phone. He spent 20 minutes out there this afternoon. Phone went dark while he was on site. Burning evidence? Ethan asked. Or moving it? Ruiz said. Riley shifted, grimacing as the movement tugged her stitches. He won't leave records at the cabin, she said. He's not that stupid. The ledger I found might have been a snapshot. His real list. He'd keep that somewhere he controls alone, somewhere nobody else can accidentally see it. Sheriff's office server? Tessa asked. Riley shook her head. Too many eyes? Where does he go alone? Ethan asked. The kind of place nobody questions if his truck's there at 2 a.m.? Riley closed her eyes, thinking. Old Coast Guard station, she said suddenly. On Breaker's Point. We turned it into Doyle's Watch a few years ago. Budget cuts, Coast Guard left, county bought the building for pennies. Doyle uses it as his storm HQ. Town loves the optics, but he's the only one with a key. Ruiz nodded slowly. High ground, line of sight on the harbor, private, easy to defend. Easy to isolate, Ethan said. He looked at Riley. We hit the cabin first. See if there's anything left, confirm your story. Then we make Doyle think his perfect little world is leaking. Shadow huffed softly, as if to say finally. How? Riley asked. Tessa's smile turned sharp. "We send him a ghost," she said, "from the lake." The cabin at North Ridge was exactly as Riley remembered it, and worse. They approached under cover of darkness, Ethan and Ruiz moving like shadows through the trees. Shadow ranged ahead on a silent command, nose skimming the forest floor, zigzagging in an invisible pattern. No car, no fresh tracks in the muddy ruts. The cabin crouched against the hill like something ashamed of itself, half its roof gone from an old fire, glassless windows yawning black. The front door hung crookedly on one hinge. "Trap?" Ruiz murmured. "Definitely," Ethan said. They circled wide, coming in through the trees at the back. Ruiz took a position on a rock outcropping, with line of sight on the front porch and the driveway. Ethan moved low, shadow glued to his side. The back door hadn't fared any better than the front. Ethan eased it open, wincing as the hinge squealed. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint sour smell of bleach someone had tried to scrub. The kitchen looked like any neglected hunting shack, rusted sink, overturned chair, a calendar from 3 years ago pinned to the wall. The basement was another story. The narrow wooden stairs creaked under Ethan's weight as he descended. He flicked his light on briefly, then off, letting his memory fill in what Riley had described. Chains, rings in the floor, stains no amount of bleach could completely erase, ghost outlines in the concrete. And in one corner, overlooked or deliberately left as a message, a single metal ring still bolted to the floor, with a length of broken chain attached. Shadow whined softly, pushing his nose against Ethan's hand. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I know, buddy." He swept his light again, this time catching something half wedged behind a cinder block near the wall. A flash of silver. He crouched, pried it loose. A small, dented USB drive. The metal casing was scratched, like someone had thrown it and missed whatever target they had been aiming for. Riley's backup. "Got a present," he murmured into his mic. "Doyle's going to be pissed when he realizes he missed that," Ruiz replied. "We should make sure he finds out." Ethan smiled without humor. "Oh, he will," he said. "He's going to get an email from a dead woman." Tessa worked like a conjurer, fingers flying over her keyboard. Back at the boathouse, Riley watched the strings of code scroll past on the screen, feeling both useless and terrified. Shadow sat with his head in her lap, the steady pressure of his skull the only thing keeping her breathing even. "Okay," Tessa said. "I've cloned your old department email, Riley. Doyle thinks he had Luke delete the account last night. Joke's on him. They only disabled the front door. Back end still wired to the state network." "Will they trace it back here?" Riley asked. Tessa snorted. "Please, I learned to do this hiding my Netflix from 3 older brothers. Doyle will think it's coming from the old cell tower by Kettle Lake." The name hit Riley like a body blow. Kettle Lake. Her mother's car, half submerged in the reeds. The way the patrol report had said suicide, when her entire soul screamed no. "How long have they been doing this?" she whispered. Ethan's hand brushed her shoulder. "Long enough, but it can end tonight." "What are you sending him?" she asked Tessa. "Just enough to make him sweat," Tessa said. "We attached the ledger, a few pictures from the cabin, and a nice little subject line. You missed a spot." Ruiz, leaning against the workbench cleaning his rifle, chuckled. "You think he bites?" he asked. "Oh, he bites," Tessa said. "Guys like Doyle don't trust anyone, not even their own cover-ups. He'll assume Luke got cold feet or Frank did something stupid. He'll go to the one place he thinks is safe to plan his next move." "The watch station," Ethan said, "and we'll be waiting." Riley looked at Shadow. "You ready?" she asked softly. Shadow thumped his tail once, eyes steady. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained for raids or ambushes. She was just a state trooper who'd made too many traffic stops and not enough noise about the things that had started not adding up 2 years ago. But she had a dog who dragged her back from the edge of the world. And tonight, she had a team. "Let's end this," she said. Breaker's Point jutted out into the Atlantic like a finger pointing accusatorily at the horizon. The old Coast Guard station sat at its tip, a squat, white-painted building with a wraparound balcony and a glass-fronted lookout facing the sea. On storm days, tourists drove out for the view. On nights like this, with the sky clear and the air biting cold, the parking lot was empty. The county had installed a new chain across the access road after buying the property. The sign said, "Authorized. Vehicles only." Doyle's black Tahoe didn't slow as it rolled up to the chain. He hit a button on his visor. Somewhere in the darkness, a motor whirred and the chain sagged, then dropped. He smiled. He was alone, no deputies, no Frank. Luke had texted an hour ago. No sign of her. Cole's place dark. Probably drifted out with the tide. Still, the email sat in his inbox like a ticking bomb. You missed a spot. Attach files that shouldn't exist. Pictures from angles nobody but that stubborn trooper could have taken. Dead women didn't send emails, which meant Riley Ward wasn't as dead as she was supposed to be. Should have put one in her head myself, he muttered, putting the SUV in park. He grabbed his go-bag from the back seat and headed inside, flicking on the station's lights. The big map table in the middle of the room glowed under fluorescence. Radios lined the far wall. A bank of monitors showed the harbor, the town square, the road up the ridge. He sat jaw tight and opened his laptop. The email stared back at him. He clicked. It was all there. Ledger scans, photos of the cabin basement, chains, stains. His handwriting on the margin of one page. Move schedule to Mondays. Fewer feds on highway. His heart rate spiked. "Luke, you idiot," he muttered, assuming betrayal was the only explanation. You never could keep your hands off something that looked like a story. He opened a secure messaging app, fingers stabbing angry commands. "Meet me at the watch, now. Come alone." He hit send. On the scrubby slope below the station, hidden among wind-twisted pines, Ethan watched the light come on in the upstairs room and felt his muscles coil. "Target's in," Ruiz's voice murmured in his ear. From his position on a rocky outcrop 100 yards out, the sniper had a clear line of sight to the station's big windows. "He's moving like a man who just found termites in his foundation." "Copy," Ethan said. "Any other vehicles on approach?" "Negative," Tessa said from the van, parked half a mile down the access road. "No cell signals except his and the dummy Luke's carrying for us." Riley lay in the back of the van, wired to a monitor. Harlan had argued bitterly about letting her come at all, but she'd won by virtue of pure, weaponized stubbornness. Shadow was with Ethan. The dog crouched low, ears forward, eyes locked on the lit square of window like it had grown teeth. "Remember the plan?" Ethan whispered. "We get him talking. We get him admitting enough that even the laziest Fed won't be able to shrug it off. Then we bring in the cavalry." Shadow's tail twitched once. "Ruiz," Ethan said, "you see Luke?" "Negative," Ruiz said, "but we'll know when he hits the geofence. Tessa's got him tagged." Almost on cue, Tessa's voice crackled softly. "Luke's phone just pinged the outer perimeter. He's coming up the access road. Speed suggests he's nervous." "Good," Ethan said. "Nerves make mouths sloppy." He waited until the Tahoe's headlights swept past their hiding spot, then moved. He and Shadow slipped up the back path, hugging the shadow of the cliff, using an old maintenance ladder the Coast Guard had abandoned when they stopped caring about rust. They reached the underside of the balcony. Above, Doyle paced, his footsteps thudding faintly through the boards. Ethan clipped a small device to the wood, a black disc the size of a poker chip. "Tessa," he whispered. "Mike is hot," she said, hearing boots and a very stressed breathing pattern. "You're good." Ethan smiled tightly. Down below, Luke's sedan rolled to a stop in the gravel lot. He sat behind the wheel for a few seconds, head tipped back, eyes closed. Then he squared his shoulders, got out, and walked toward his reckoning. Inside, Doyle heard the door and snapped, "Up here." Luke climbed the stairs, each step echoing in Ethan's ear through the live feed. Doyle didn't waste time. "You talk to anyone?" he demanded. Luke's voice was tight. "About what?" "About this," Doyle snarled. "Don't play dumb boy. Somebody sent me evidence that should have gone to the bottom of the ocean with Ward." Luke swallowed. "I told you. I dropped her. Tide was going out. There was no—" "She had a helper," Doyle cut in. "Some wannabe hero with a dog. A harbor master saw him haul something out of the surf after you left. Then our hero decided he didn't like making emergency calls. Now I've got pictures in my inbox." A beat. Then, softly, dangerously, "You didn't get a soft spot, did you, Luke?" Outside, Ethan felt the hairs on his arms stir. "Shadow," he murmured. "Stay." The dog settled, muscles quivering but controlled. Inside, Luke took a shaky breath that crackled in Ethan's ear. "You said she'd die fast," Luke said. I said what I had to say," Doyle snapped. "People like her don't back down. They don't shut up. They think their little oath means something. You either break them or you bury them. That's the job." "The job," Luke echoed. "The job was traffic stops and domestic calls, not—" His voice broke. "Not selling people." "Grow up," Doyle said. "You think those rich folks in Boston hospitals ask where their kidneys come from? They send flowers. They write checks. They feel good. We make a cut. The donors get out of debt. It's a damn service." "You left her chained to a rock," Luke said. The words came out flat. "No service there." A chair scraped. Doyle's voice dropped, almost oily. "You going soft on me, son?" Luke didn't answer. "You know what happens to soft people?" Doyle continued. "They end up on the ledger, and I don't mean as a donor." "Got enough?" Ruiz murmured in Ethan's ear. "Getting there," Ethan said. Inside, Doyle's tone sharpened. "This is what's going to happen. You're going to find Cole in his mutt. You're going to put them down clean. Then you're going to help me make sure that Trooper's body washes up somewhere she can't talk." "Can't," Luke whispered. "Won't," Doyle corrected. There was a click, the unmistakable sound of a gun being drawn from a holster. "We've got a good thing, Luke. Don't make me replace you." Ethan moved before he thought. He swung himself up onto the balcony, Shadow leaping beside him in one fluid motion. The dog hit the deck running, heading straight for the open doorway at the end of the balcony. "Go!" Ethan hissed. Shadow barreled through the door just as Doyle spun toward the sound, gun in hand. The dog collided with his legs, driving him sideways into the map table. The gun went off, the shot punching a hole in the ceiling. Luke stumbled back, eyes blown wide, as Ethan followed his dog inside, pistol leveled. "Drop it!" Ethan barked. "Now!" For a second, nobody moved. Doyle lay half-sprawled on the map table, Shadow's teeth inches from his throat, chest heaving. Blood stained the sheriff's jeans where the dog's claws had raked him. But Shadow hadn't gone for the kill, yet. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured. "We need him to talk a little longer." Doyle's eyes flicked between the dog and Ethan's gun. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said. "On the contrary," Ethan said. "I'm very clear about it. I'm making sure the state AG gets a front row seat to your confession." Doyle's gaze snapped to the balcony as faint sirens wailed in the distance. "You called them," he said. "State police, FBI, organ-trafficking task force you didn't bother to read about because you thought it would never be your problem," Ethan said. "They've been listening since you started practicing your villain monologue, Marcus." Doyle's jaw clenched. "You think they'll protect your little trooper? They'll throw her under the bus to make the story cleaner. One rogue sheriff, one corrupt deputy, one emotionally unstable trooper. They'll eat you alive, Ward." Riley stepped into view in the doorway, one hand braced on the wall, the other holding a service pistol steady. Shadow's ears flicked, but he didn't move off Doyle's chest. "I've been eaten alive before," Riley said, voice hoarse but clear. "I got better." Doyle stared at her like she was a ghost. "You were supposed to be dead," he whispered. "You keep saying that," she said. "Maybe stop trying to make it true," he sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're a line item. You're a girl who couldn't save her mommy from a lake and decided to save the world instead." The words punched the air out of Riley's lungs. "How do you—" she began. "Your mom owed money," Doyle said. "She signed up with one of our donor programs. Car went off the dock before. We could take delivery, waste a good tissue, but the debt stayed. People like you are born owing." Ethan saw Riley's knuckles whiten on the grip of her pistol. "Riley," he said quietly, "he wants you off balance. Don't give him what he wants." Her eyes locked on Doyle. "You hurt kids," she said. "You sold women like cattle. You chained me to a rock so you could go to Florida. You don't get to talk about my mother." Doyle laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You gonna shoot me, trooper?" he asked. "You do, and your case is dead. They'll say you snapped. They'll say you made it all up to justify killing a good church-going sheriff." Riley's hands shook. Shadow's growl rumbled against Doyle's ribs. "Riley," Ethan said softly, "remember what you told me you wanted." She swallowed. "Justice," she whispered. Not revenge, he said. Her arm steadied. She lowered the muzzle 2 inches, sighting in on Doyle's right knee. You're right, she said. I need you alive. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked like a whip. Doyle screamed as his kneecap detonated in a spray of bone and blood. Shadow danced back, avoiding the spatter, then surged forward again as Doyle convulsed, keeping his teeth bared inches from the man's face. Don't move, Ethan said, or my dog will forget his training and I'll forget to remind him. Sirens grew louder, closer. Tires screeched on gravel outside. Luke stood frozen, eyes fixed on the blood spreading across the floor. You got one more choice, Luke, Riley said, breathing hard. Tell them you were scared and stupid and ready to make it right, or keep your mouth shut and go down with him. Luke met her eyes. I'll talk, he whispered. God help me, I'll talk. God finally gets to do something around here. Tessa's voice crackled in Ethan's earpiece. State police are on the stairs. You might want to get Shadow off the chew toy before they freak out. Ethan whistled low. Shadow, out. The dog backed off immediately, but didn't take his eyes off Doyle. When the first trooper burst through the door, weapon drawn, he took in the scene with a trained sweep. Bleeding sheriff on the floor, battered trooper still on her feet. Unknown male with gun lowered but ready, dog in a downstay. Hands where I can see them, he barked. Ethan raised his empty hand slowly, keeping the other wrapped around his badge wallet. Relax, he said. We've been doing your job all night. Time to tag in. The headlines hit the next morning like a thunderclap. Sheriff charged in organ-trafficking ring. State trooper survives murder attempt. Blows whistle on rural corruption. On the third day, a smaller story appeared below the fold. Local veteran and service dog assist in takedown of Harvest King. Riley hated that phrase. It made Doyle sound mythic, not pathetic. The Bots grand jury didn't, though. They liked the word kingpin even better. Doyle's lawyers tried everything. Attacked Riley's mental health. Questioned Ethan's combat record. Suggested Shadow was a weapon of intimidation that skewed witness statements. Then Tessa put the audio from the watch station on a loop in the courtroom. Doyle's own voice, bragging about inventory and calling the dead donors, echoed off the paneled walls. The jury didn't come back with questions. They came back with a list of guilty verdicts long enough to make the judge's head spin. Doyle went away for life. Luke took a deal. So did Frank. Their testimony peeled back layers of rot that had spread far beyond Camden Point, up into the hospital network, sideways into a private security firm, all the way to a medical supplier in Boston who thought he was untouchable. He wasn't. Riley didn't get her badge back. She turned it in, quietly, 6 weeks after Doyle's sentencing. Not because she'd lost faith in the law, but because she'd seen what happened when good people assumed the uniform was enough. She wanted to build something outside the chain of command. So, she started the Kettle Foundation, named for the lake she'd once thought had stolen her mother, dedicated to people the system had written off. Addicts, runaways, veterans living in their trucks. They offered legal help, medical referrals, and a very particular kind of therapy. Shadow was the first program director. Ethan hadn't planned on any of it. He'd thought he'd go back to running docks and patching nets, letting the storm nights blur together until his own ghosts faded. Instead, he found himself building ramps behind the Foundation's new office, installing secure locks on doors, and teaching a rotation of skittish, wide-eyed rescues how to walk on a leash without panicking. Shadow took one look at the first broken dog they brought in, a lanky shepherd mix with ribs like a xylophone, and decided he was in charge of onboarding. He'd nudge the new arrival, walk a few paces, look back as if to say, "See, the human's slow but harmless. You can relax." The dogs believed him. So did the people. One crisp October afternoon, almost a year after the night on the rocks, the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the harbor gold. The Foundation's backyard, once a patch of scrub grass behind an old post office, was alive with motion. Dogs chased tennis balls. Kids from the shelter squealed as wet noses found their cheeks. A grill smoked quietly in the corner. Harlan sat in a folding chair, grumbling about noise, while slipping bits of hot dog to any four-legged thing that wandered by. Tessa argued with Ruiz about the best way to hit a moving target at 800 yards, using ketchup bottles as props. Riley stood by the low fence, looking out at the water. Ethan walked up beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. "Storm rolling in tomorrow?" he said. She smiled. "You gonna run it?" "Probably," he said. "Shadow gets grumpy if we skip leg day." As if on cue, the dog trotted up, metal clinking softly against his collar. It had arrived in a padded envelope from the Department of Defense, a K-9 Medal of Honor for exceptional bravery in support of law enforcement operations. The ceremony had been small. Ethan had insisted. But the look on Riley's face when she pinned it on Shadow had been worth more than any parade. "I still have dreams," she said quietly now, eyes on the horizon. "Sometimes I'm back in that cave. Sometimes it's the cabin. Sometimes it's my mom's car on the lake and Doyle's face in the reflection." Ethan nodded. "I dream of other rocks," he said. "Other nights. Other men I couldn't drag out in time." Shadow leaned against both of them, pressing his warm weight along their legs, anchoring them to the here and now. "I used to think surviving meant going back to how things were before," Riley said. "Now I think maybe it means building something that doesn't look like before at all." Ethan watched a gull dip low over the water, its wings flashing white. "Before was rotten in places we didn't see," he said. "Now we look. Maybe that's the point." Kids laughed behind them. A dog barked, high and happy. Somewhere, a bell buoy clanged its steady rhythm. Riley turned and studied his face. "You could have walked away that night," she said. "You could have called 911 and gone home. You didn't." He shrugged. "Shadow doesn't like walking away from problems," he said. "He's a bad influence." Shadow huffed, almost offended. Riley laughed, then sobered. "Thank you," she said. Not for the first time, but with a weight that made it feel like it counted differently now. Ethan looked down at Shadow. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank the guy with 4 legs who dragged my stubborn ass up those rocks." Shadow's tail thumped. A gust of wind off the harbor lifted Riley's hair, carrying the sharp, clean smell of the sea. She looked back at the water one more time, then at the yard full of noise and second chances. "You know what I like best about all this?" she asked. "What?" "Doyle thought the ocean would swallow what he did," she said. "But it didn't. It just brought us together." Ethan considered that. "Storms wash a lot away," he said, "but sometimes they leave behind exactly what you need." Shadow barked once, as if in agreement, then trotted off to break up a tug-of-war between 2 pups who were playing too rough. Riley and Ethan stood side by side, shoulders almost touching, watching the sun slide into the sea. Not heroes, not saints. Just 2 people who had seen the worst a uniform could hide, and decided to build something that uniforms couldn't corrupt. Behind them, on the back porch, a battered plaque Harlan had nailed up that morning caught the light. The words were simple, burned into the wood with a shaky hand, in honor of those who were left for dead and refused to stay there. Shadow paused beneath it, glanced back at his humans, then settled at their feet, gaze on the horizon, ears tuned for storms that might come. If darkness tried to creep in again, he'd hear it first, and this time it wouldn't find anyone alone.